I'm going to start this bird the same way with some white. Paying attention to the areas. This wing, of course, will be a lot darker in color. So I'm going to start with this side of him and sort of his breast, which will be underneath the wing. I want to paint the wing on top of it, so I'm going to start with this area. Here. So it was starting to get a little bit dark, so I needed to clean off my brush just a little bit. I just wiped it off on my painting shirt and then add a little bit of this lighter gray, because as the paint was going, it was starting to feel like the dark was just taking over, and you need to lighten up the area that I'm working on for here. So, but again, keeping this, this is kind of a shadowed area, so I'm going to hint at that. Even this little bit of blue, which is working as my shadow on this bird. But this bird is going to be the one that has the red plumage. And I ended up this time, because I wasn't quite happy with how orange, this type of orange here, so I actually mixed it with the crimson red. When I first was starting and experimenting with some of the colors, I used the primary red here, but this is the crimson red, and I like this color tonality a little bit more. I have it mixed with the yellow ochre and some white, and also a little bit of the just that primary yellow I put in there too. So I'm gonna add some of that now. He's got some really nice dark areas under here. Add a little bit of the blue, I can really shade those areas a lot. And just soften them in. And I'm gonna go lighter as well. So I want to be careful to just use light brush strokes here so that I can get this feel of the, just a little bit of this plumage going on. And I don't want to over blend it either. Be careful about that. Now again, just like with the first bird, it'll be easier to just ignore the eye at this point and put it back in on top of the painting. Clean my brush a little bit. I want to get some lighter tones in here. So I think it seems like there is a little bit of a different tone for some of this here. A little bit more of this orangey color I had. Not too much. So some of this I can use this to darken the area around here that's going to be more in the shade, and to get a feel for the shape here. I'm actually going to switch to this smaller brush also, and it's just a little bit damp. This is just to basically using it as a blending brush. I just want to blend the paint that's here very gently. To adjust what's happening. And some darker bits there. Some very light gray around the eye and light getting ready for being able to place the eye with the appropriate tones. A little bit more of this deeper red. Some of these areas. Mixing the burnt umber with my crimson red, and I actually want to have a few strokes here that show some feathers sticking out. So I want that to go out. So some of the areas we want to have nice and smooth around, but then some of them we need to see if there are feathers that are sticking out, what does that look like? And be able to give a little bit of that texture. So this has a little bit more. So it's kind of that red, crimson red, and the brown together on it. There's a few dark shape here with some of those really small little feathers. And then it's also kind of a light grayish in the middle of it. More of this built up. So very small short strokes are going to work well for this area of the bird's head because we have much smaller feathers. So the feathering pattern, we want to stick with that very small, a small brush, small that, and then for the other areas on the bird, using a larger brush is going to work much better so we can get those larger feather areas, the different sizes textured. So we wouldn't want to leave that all to be done with the same brush and try and make like bigger strokes with a small brush. We want to keep it using the right brush, multiple brushes for each area that you need. Blending that. So I've still got this area here that's very light. I actually want to get this color in there. Go. Maybe a little over here. But that's not quite right. I need to get some of my darker color here blending in. So that's getting the idea. I'm building it up here. I want to get some of these darker areas, sometimes using a little bit of burnt umber and a little bit of my ultramarine blue is going to give some nice shadowy tones where I want to get some darker areas built up and keeping up with the shape and the textures that I want to see. So a little bit more of, this is my white and burnt umber. So this I can get some of this other little plumage in here. A lot of different sort of coloration. Cute little finches. areas where the feather pattern is broken up a little bit. So under here. So that's working pretty well for his under the main part of him, and I'm going to add some white now to get the rest of this tail area. Now I have this twig right here, so I want to be careful about going around it. Generally, it is better to paint the behind things first. Sometimes you need to go a little out of order for one reason or another, and that's fine. Let's make it work. Going with the wet brush and a little further out than I wanted to go. Okay, so what I see in here is I need to have some shadowy areas, but not too dark. It's a fairly light shadowy area, and so we'll cut. More brown, but not too much. And I can get my tail on top. It's going to be fairly dark. I'm going to add a little bit of light to it also. This time I'm going to start off. Now before I had decided to tuck the tail, have it overlap a little bit, so it's going to go behind this other bird. And actually I'm seeing that this, a lot of what I have here is going to be underneath, so I'm going to get even darker. Because all of this is going to be in shadow. I'm going to get my brush, just dip it in water and take some of that extra water off, just to make sure that the paint is flowing a little bit more smoothly. So this is a nice color, this burnt umber with ultramarine blue in it. Gets a nice deep dark tone for me here. To use some of that ultramarine blue again to help deepen my shadows here. Those up. Now, of course, in these tail feathers, there are two main feather groups here, so I want to get that sort of split in there. And I'm going to go darker on this side so that it has the feeling of being shadowed from the other one. And from this too, add a little bit of dark. And then the light though is hitting on this edge, so I actually do need to lighten that up and make sure that I have a little bit of a highlight. I'm going to use this one here and mix a little bit, go in between with that. So then this, I want to lighten this area here. This is the sun hitting on that side. It's also hitting just a bit there. So that those sides are a little bit lighter. Then I can start working on this plumage here. I'm going to stick with a lot of this color for this wing now, and have most of it actually be this kind of tonality. And there'll be some white in there also. If it's anything too like a small little line of detail that may have to wait to be an upper layer once the paint is more dry, you may have to come in. So it just depends on if the paint seems to be mixing too much and too many strokes, make it more blended together than you are trying to go for. Then just giving it a little bit of time to dry can really help. A lot of this is going to be predominantly the burnt umber color here, the darker wing. I may just switch my brush in. So you don't really need too many brushes, so it's worth investing in a better brush, especially if you know that you're going to be doing a lot of acrylic painting, if you particularly like this type of painting. Keeping a good brush that holds its point really well, even after it's been used quite a bit. But also being aware that if you're painting a lot, your brushes are just going to wear out. So you can decide, sometimes it's better to go with a little cheaper brush and replace just a little bit more frequently. Then you can always have a nice, good tip on it. This. Very dark on that. It's giving definition to that wing, and then I can start to find some of the areas on the wing that need even more shape and definition to them. So there's a very strong dark colored feather here, some long ones here. Start to look at some of those shapes, making sure I get them, and I'm probably going to have to switch to a smaller brush to get a lot of these wing shapes in here, the feathers of this wing. But I'm going to start with my bigger brush. Use a bigger brush as much as possible, and then don't go too small too quick. You want to save that smaller brush just for as as late in the process as you can. So you want to do most of what you can do with as large of a brush as you can. It keeps it from being overworked. It keeps a more fresh kind of look, and just has also saves a lot of time. So you're not trying to work in a tiny little brush to fill in a large area. So sometimes that means that you'll be going over it a couple of times. I like having a little bit of that blue, so I want to make sure that I don't lose that in blending in. So the shape of this brush is not lending itself very well to the feathers in this section. It worked great for the bird's breast and some other areas, but it is not particularly working great for this wing. Some of these are going to work out fine with it, but overall I don't think I like it as much. Let's see. So I need a little bit of this yellow ochre mixed with it. Give a nice tone for here. This finch had just a little bit of a bit more of this golden color in some of these sections. And then a little bit more umber. So I want to darken up some shadow areas that are under here to make these layers stand out more. I'm going to need to add a little bit more white to them also. And there's also, if I can use the corner of this brush, I might be able to get some little dark areas on here also. Not part of the wing. Few of these. Yep, so that gives a little bit more detail in the wing. Give it some good overlap. Now, this bird still doesn't have his beak or eye, nor do either of the birds have their feet. So we want to do those as well. I'm gonna work on the beak next. I'm getting kind of my silvery gray here. And it's going to have just a little bit of the burnt umber, I think, because the gray is just a little too flat on its own. It has just a little bit of burnt umber in it that really warms up the tone. It can still read as a gray, but it's not quite as flat gray. It's more, or cool, it's more neutral. So I can start by essentially covering the entire beak with that one tone, kind of a mid-tone, and then I can add darker areas and lighter areas as I need them. So this can help me get the overall shape put in. And I can add, so I can see that there's actually just a little bit of reflected light under his beak. And I want to include that with this as well. So in the shadow tone that I'm doing under his beak, I'm going to have some reds in it to give it that reflected light of his chest in there. And I need to go darker. I'm wanting to carefully build up my tones so they don't go too dark too quick. Although with, it's probably a little bit because I'm a watercolor artist, and acrylic you can go bold and then tone it down very easily. So there's different methods that will work just as well. Pure white, especially not yet, because it's going to end up looking too bright. So even if it's almost pure white, just like a very, very light gray, it's still going to look really bright on here. And in just a little bit. So, and then I might, now that I have some comparison, I think that actually this beak needs to have a little bit more light on it. I don't think I got quite light enough, so I'm going to add a little bit to that edge, and that's going to kind of brighten that up a little bit more, make it seem a little more shiny and smooth. So I'm gonna add some light areas here. Kind of has this wrinkly look here, so I want to get some of that, leaving it a little bit rough. And I think I'm ready to do the eye of the bird now. Again, I want to make sure that I just have the paint on my tip of my brush. I don't want to push the brush all the way in. It's very small. That way I can get just a small little area that I need to paint on here. So I want to watch the shape. This eye is turned a little more toward us. It's going to have more of a triangle look to it. Just a little bit of a curve over there. That's probably about all I need to do with that one. All right, and then once that gets a little more dry, I can add the white dot on there. But if I do it now, it could work, and it also might just mix in a little bit, so I'm going to prefer to wait. I am actually going to do, though, a little bit of light. Should have done this earlier. I think it needs a little bit of light on top of it, and that sort of helps that. Right, so now what we need to do is the feet on all of our birds, and then we can be done. And I might want like a little bit more of these wings with this brush. Just adds a little different texture to it. Yeah. Okay. All right. So now I want to look at what are some tones that I want. I think that mostly these feet are going to be with my burnt umber, and it probably needs just like a little bit of, I think even with that ultramarine blue, I think that mix is going to be just perfect for the main part, and then I can add some light areas and then a little extra for some dark areas. So, is this leg coming out? Again, this is a smaller detail, so I want to make sure that paint is more on the tip of my brush and not all over it. And I'm going to look at the angle that this comes out. And think about the joints, so it's not just like a curve, right? But kind of think about the like knuckles and joints that you might have on that bird's claws and how they might come at angles to really be grabbing on to this branch. A little knobbly. And then we'll add some light areas onto them also, because we do have light coming in on them. So this one here is actually, I see a lot more light on this one. So I'm just gonna go right ahead and add more of that for the main part of him, so I don't have to go over it too many times. But this would be, let me go with that. So here I'm gonna see some of that lighter tone, some areas here, and get even lighter also. I'm just going to add a little bit of it right now. Yeah. And with this one, main part of this. It's matching in too much with the color of the branch, so I think adding in some white, and actually I think he needs just a little bit of the crimson color too to get the tone of that more accurate on his feet. A little bit of these different colors. But I don't want them to just suddenly happen at the tips of the toes, so I want to include them through various areas here. And getting these two are very close together. starting to glob up a little bit, which is meaning that I can't get as detailed of a line, so that's a little problematic. Now this one here is very dark, this one that I'm seeing here, his second foot. I'm gonna start with lots. It's just in the shadow here. Now I am gonna have to go in. I didn't get my blue, my background blue quite enough close to there. So I have some of the canvas showing through of just plain canvas that hasn't been painted on. So I'm gonna have to cover that up with some of this light background blue paint for the sky. So a lot of that one's just in the shadow. I don't really need to see a lot of it. I might do a little bit of highlights on it, just so it doesn't feel like it's getting lost. On some of them, but not too much. Now I'm gonna make some of my darker tones on this one here, especially over on the other side. And it's going to need to go quite a bit darker than what's here. So right now this is actually being a little bit of an underpainting because his claw is looking pretty chunky. So I want to do some of this light blue for the background before I get too far into it. I need to match that color. A little bit more blue. Okay. So some of these areas where I didn't quite paint enough of the blue, or if I need to make that claw leg a little bit smaller, I can come in with this color, kind of feather the edges with the paintbrush to make it blend into the background there. Clean up a few sides. So I'm seeing that here too, there's a few areas where I didn't go quite close enough. So I can clean that up now by going in. Now for this, it's going to be very important to make sure that you match that blue tone. And if you can't match it, then you're gonna have to kind of paint over a lot more areas to make sure that you can get it as covered up as you can. But, or add in kind of a second layer that's distinct enough that's like an on-purpose cloud type of area. But it should be pretty easy. One of the things about using a limited palette is that if you do have to go back in and make some changes like this, you should be able to color match that exactly. So what I'm doing right here, that's a little bit too light. I need to clean off my brush actually and dry it off just a little bit and get a little bit more of that darker blue in there. So this area is a lot darker. And then if you even kind of spread it out with a little bit more water on the edges, then that can help it to just blend and not be like a patch that you can particularly see. Okay. So I got in a little bit closer into some of my areas here. I think I'm seeing a little detail here. So sometimes it might end up being where if you did too much of a patch in, or you have to kind of just end up doing a lot more painting and painting in a background kind of again, which might be the case, and that's fine. So one of the things that's happening here too is I see that this branch is just getting lost into his tail. So I want to do something to make that more distinct, as well as a few other touches to make these feet more distinct, especially that one right there that looks really scary. So some of the things I'm going to do is come in with a lighter paint here. Figure out. It's kind of an unusual color in his feet. So it might take a little bit of mixing to get a color that you like. It's going to work well. That's not quite. So now I have a little bit more tone happening. I can kind of get this light and shadow here. There's definitely a lot lighter bits. Some of these, and that's helping him. Those feet kind of take a little bit better shape. And this one's still pretty weird looking. So I'm going to actually take some of that blue back in. I'm going to cover up a little bit more. This claw came out too far. So I want to have a little bit more room to paint that. And there it needs to be just a little smaller. This brush is not working the greatest for that one. So I seem to get a little bit better over here, but I'm having more trouble making this work over here. So I'm also not super happy with the color that I'm doing. I think I'm going to try just a little bit more of just the burnt umber and see what happens when I do that. It's a little bit difficult because it's blending in so much with the branch behind it. I wonder if I can. So I might take this. Add a little bit more of a highlight there. And now when I come in, I think I can have a little bit more shape. What I'm trying to do. Also, these are more angular, which works, and this got just a little bit too like chunky and curly. Kind of looking pretty funny. to kind of erase, in a way, some of what I was doing. Okay. And make it. So I'm going to need to let that dry before I do too much on there. So I'm going to look at some other areas that I might need. He needs a little white gleam on the tip of his eye to make that really come alive. So tiny little white dot. And I want to pay attention to where I put that. Just a little white dot. All it needs. So I can look at anywhere else where I feel like a little bit of that might help. So there's just some little areas. And I think the base of his tail also could be lightened up. It has like a little bit of a light edge to it, and that's going to help that stand out from the shadow of it and not get too lost. Just enough. This one can have a little bit of the same hint. Okay. That's probably a lot dry enough now that I can go back in and try again. What was happening here too is I didn't like how this one kind of comes down and then wraps straight down. And the second one, my paint is starting to get a little bit dry too. So sometimes when that happens, the paint doesn't flow as well and it makes it a little bit more difficult to work with. It's not. So these two claws of his here are very close together. And so they seem to kind of go into one. So now that's better, and I need to get just a little bit of that shape more out of there. There's some this side being darker. Keep that shadow. And some lighter tones here. And then in order to stand out from the blue of the sky in the background here, I think I actually have to go quite a bit lighter to get a little highlight on that leg. and that works. Okay. It's actually a very funny angle. I didn't realize what an odd angle this little foot was until I started painting it. It's just some little highlight details, just some small little highlight details to really get the shape of it down. I'm going to use some of the blue. So probably what it needs a little bit of too is a little bit of a claw, a sharp claw shape to give some distinction. So with that I might use like the edge. But some of that is actually going to be because it needs to be hanging over, and I have this other twig here. Ha! So now it's all too spread out. Erase some of that. I'm just going to keep it with a little bit of bump. Okay. Okay, so this has some of the shapes. I might actually want to do a little bit more highlighting over here along this edge. It's going to need to be fairly white because it's right up next to the light blue of the sky. So if it's not light enough with that pure white, we won't really see what's happening. And then I might do, this is pretty light here. And the same on this side, actually. I do have a little bit of a white edge to the tail. So being able to get in some of those smaller little details, if you want to keep going and add some more highlights onto your painting. And that just starts to pop out some of these areas that you can see them a little bit better. A few little white bits up here. Each little area, each time you add just a little bit more, it can give a little bit more of that texture. I don't like that. To give it a little bit more shape and finished feeling. And then sometimes you can go back into some of these areas, like that foot I'm still not happy with, but there it is. And the other thing that I was looking at is this part of the twig really just blends in. It lines up with his tail too much, and the colors line up, so it's really hard to see what's going on there. So I think what I want to do, I could do a couple things, is actually probably the best thing to do is to shorten it. I think that in the sketch it looked out like it was going to work fine, but in the finished version, I don't think it does as much. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to match this color, and I'm going to go ahead and paint right over it as if it wasn't there, and how I want this tail to be. And then I'm going to have to shorten this quite a bit though. So I have to see where it's going to work to do that. So it's going to be a little bit of a dark area right on top, because that's going to be where this wing is casting a little bit of a shadow onto here. So I want to get that on there just a bit, and it's kind of wrapping around here. And now I have this twig is really going up into his tail, so I'm going to have to make that very, very distinct. So one of the other things I have to do is make a little bit more sky. touch my sky color again, and paint over that bit of twig here. Probably need just a little bit more. Okay, so now this is making a lot more sense with that twig. I think it's going to work better, and I can even just, probably even just leave it like that. So that might work just fine. That doesn't go into his tail quite so much, so it kind of works a little bit better. I might want to play with the end of it though. I think that it does look a little cut off now, so I am going to take some of these darker tones that I had on it before and just do a little bit of a finishing edge on it. And I can be a little bit more bold about how it goes over his tail, making it a little bit bigger. And it is matching a bit with the colors in the tail, but I can do a few things to that. One of the things I could do is, I don't want to use the same color. I can lighten this area. I'm gonna make sure that is a different sort of color than the tail of that second bird, so that it does feel like it's on top. So I think that works a little bit better. It doesn't have quite as much of a disappearing into the tail aspect as it did before. So I can look at this now and start to make some fine-tune details, adjust some things, maybe change, add more things into the background, and any other kinds of details that you might want to do. And then just building up, I can keep going really for a lot, and I can add little, really dark little shadow areas and help make some areas pop out. Sometimes you have to step back from it and get a look at what you've painted and look at it for even a day or a few days, and then you can kind of see some areas that need a little bit more touching up. So it can be done and finished, and you can keep going on it and getting in a lot more details. I'm expecting beginners will not have as finished look of a painting, and more advanced students will have a little bit more finished look. So it really just depends on where you're at, and the point of it is just to keep learning and enjoying your time painting and appreciating some of God's beautiful creation and expressing your own creativity, all that fun stuff.